Welcome to episode 2 of Pro Overwatch News Recap. If you're new to the channel or missed out on episode 1 of the series, here's a quick breakdown of how it works. So basically, what I do is summarize and give my opinion on news that happened in the world of Pro Overwatch over the last week or two, and I know it's hard for some people to keep up with all the constant news, so if you fall under this category, then these are the types of videos for you. In today's installment, we'll be going over some of the Overwatch League free agency news that includes both players and coaches, along with some small Overwatch World Cup stuff. Before we get into it all though, I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate Element Mystic on winning the 2019 Overwatch Contenders Gauntlet held in Korea. This group of guys worked very hard and they took care of business, so definitely well deserved on their part. I'm sure that a bunch of their players will be getting contract offers from Overwatch League teams, whether they're old enough already or will soon be 18 by the time Season 3 begins. A lot of people who participated in the Gauntlet in general though should be getting contract offers or at the very least be getting scouted. If you want to get ahead of the game by scouting some of the talent that could very well end up on your favorite team in 2020, as well as some promising prospects who are not yet old enough to be in the league, then I highly recommend going back and watching some of these games from the Gauntlet if you haven't already, because some of these matches are really good and you may learn a thing or two. I know I certainly did. That's enough about that though. Let's get straight into the juicy Overwatch League offseason news that you may have missed. Where to begin though? Well, many teams have headlines surrounding them as of right now, so let's just go in alphabetical order, which means that first up is the Florida Mayhem. So back on October 7th, Florida announced the release of Swan, Zephyr, DPI, Rain, and Hagopun alongside KH1, who was one of their assistant coaches. So I wouldn't say any of these moves are all that surprising. I mean, at the very least, it was pretty obvious that Swan and Zephyr were on the way out, and KH1, I'm assuming he just wasn't doing a great job at coaching because he's only been signed since June. DPI, who supposedly goes by the name of Creature now, alongside Rain and Hagopun, are a bit more interesting to see go. DPI and Rain didn't get all that much playtime, so I'm assuming they're still unproven players with potential, but Florida clearly feels that they aren't meant to be part of their future. If you watch the short video in their official announcement tweet, which I will leave a link to in the description by the way, then you know that Florida thinks Gargoyle is the answer for them at off-tank, so they really don't require the services of either DPI or Zephyr. With Rain, it was a bit more uncertain, but I'm assuming they really like Chris or maybe have something else planned at the main support position. Plus, it was said in the video that Rain is quiet, so perhaps his communication isn't quite good enough. But the move that surprises me more than anything else, if I had to pick one move that's kind of surprising, is the release of Hagopun. Hago, in my opinion, was one of the more consistent players on Florida this year, and he actually played pretty well in Stage 4. I'd even go as far as to say that he's one of the better Moira players in the league during this time, and yet the Florida video says that they kind of feel Byram is their guy. With how Hago performed to end the year, it does seem a bit questionable to go in this direction, but if those so-called rumors about Hago and Florida having past drama is true, then I guess it makes a bit more sense to see him leave. That's all the Florida news there is though, so now let's move on to the next team. Now we have some small news regarding the Guangzhou Charge. This was already known because of the Overwatch League website and that article they released discussing player contracts, but Bishu made it official on his Twitter that he is LFT for 2020 and is looking for new opportunities, but he did make it clear that he's still with the Guangzhou Charge right now for the time being. Bishu has always been a serviceable off-tank player, so I'm sure some teams could be interested in him. If not, then maybe the Charge bring him back as either a backup or maybe even as their starter if they can't re-sign Hoppa or get somebody else they like. Bishu is such a positive influence, and I think any team would be lucky to have a guy like him. Moving on to the London Spitfire. As we all know, Guard, Birdring, and Nuss were all off the team, but they went ahead on their Twitters and officially announced that they are LFT, and it's definitely interesting to see Birdring in particular come out and say he's looking for another chance in 2020, since it was rumored he was mulling retirement and that he did not enjoy the game anymore, but Birdring put all of that to bed with the following TwitLonger post. Here's what he had to say regarding his disappointing Season 2, as well as free agency and his desire to play the game still, and I quote, "To me, Season 2 was a season full of regrets and frustrations. Before the season started, I steeled myself to work hard, but it didn't work out how I wanted it to. At the beginning of the season, during the GOATS meta, I was in charge of playing Zarya, but I couldn't utilize her properly like I thought I could. Because of my mistakes, we kept losing, and I had to play new heroes and heroes that I'm not good at. This pressure and lack of confidence stayed with me until the second half of the season, and I'm frustrated at myself. However, I want to find a new team to be with and start again in a new mindset and with a new mind. While I was resting, I had many thoughts, but I thought mostly about how I want to work hard and repay the fans who have been supporting me. In Season 3, I promise to work hard so I don't burn out and show my best self to repay all of you. Thank you to all the fans who have always worried about me and supported me." So yeah, there you go. Birdring along with Guard and Nuss are all looking for a fresh start in 2020. I'm glad to see that Birdring opened up a bit on how he was disappointed with his performance in the first half of 2019 and how he's motivated to improve and get better. Birdring was such a good player at the beginning of the 2018 season, and I'm sure many of his fans would love to see him play at that level again. I'm happy to see he's still motivated to play the game, and although he was nowhere close to perfect this year, I think he had his moments, especially in Stage 4 and the playoffs. With how he ended the year, I think there's maybe a chance he gets picked up by a new team. I think there's a good chance Guard ends up finding a new home as well since he has potential, but I'm a bit more unsure when it comes to Nuss. Like, maybe someone will take him if he's willing to take a pay cut or serve as a backup, but we'll have to see. Moving on to the Los Angeles Gladiators, they went out and re-signed their head coach and general manager Deepay after he initially became LFT at the start of free agency. Good to see the Gladiators lock this guy up under a new contract. Deepay, as I've mentioned before here on the channel, is a solid coach and strategist who seems to be a great leadership figure. The Gladiators surely would have missed this guy greatly if they let him walk away. That being said, it seems Deepay never wanted to leave the Gladiators in the first place. He probably just threatened to leave unless they paid him his desired salary, if I had to take a guess. In other Gladiators news, on October 7th, Void officially announced that he is LFT like Surefour did back on the 4th. Now, there still is a chance the Gladiators sign both Void and Surefour back, but potentially losing Void in particular to another team he wants to play for and or one who offers him a larger contract would just be tragic. Sometimes it may not show in game, but Void has really come into his own this year. In 2018, he was splitting playtime with Bishu and he simply didn't look comfortable in that English-speaking environment yet, but this year has proved to be much different. Void was unbelievably consistent this year. His D.Va play was top tier and his stats back it up. I'll put them up on the screen right now if you don't believe me. He was amongst the top when it came to eliminations per 10 minutes, and I'm not just talking about at the off-tank position. In general, he was near the top of the league for kill participation. He's so involved with kills, and yet he rarely dies. He easily had the lowest death rate out of any tank in the league, and he's at the top for lowest deaths, period. I kind of feel like Void quietly had a solid year, and not enough people seem to give him a lot of notice or appreciation for the work he put in. I'm sure that Void will be a sought-after player for both mixed and full Korean rosters if he does not end up re-signing with the Gladiators. It's really starting to look like the Gladiators may not be able to bring back all of their free agents. I'm assuming that Hydration, Surefour, and Void all really want to get paid this offseason, and I'm unsure if the Gladiators have enough money or even just potentially want to pay more than they'd like to be quite honest. I don't know at this point. Does this necessarily mean Surefour, Hydration, and Void definitely aren't coming back? No, of course not. In fact, and this is just my opinion by the way, I think there's a really good chance that Hydration at the very least ends up re-signing. Unlike Surefour and Void, he hasn't really said anything on social media about being LFT. I think he really wants to be a Gladiator still, and I believe both sides have been working towards a new deal. Now, that's not to say the Gladiators don't re-sign Void or Surefour without a doubt, because it is very much possible, but I personally think there's a decent chance it won't happen. That's my 2 cents on it anyway. Now for some quick news involving the Valiant. So just a few days ago, their former assistant coach Promised announced that he is now LFT and is looking for a new opportunity either as a head coach or assistant coach in the Overwatch League. The 22-year-old coach joined the Valiant back in April, so his time with the team was pretty short. Before joining the Valiant though, Promise was a coach on the Florida Mayhem, and before that, he coached Mayhem Academy. I'm sure someone's going to pick Promise up, like I just have a feeling about it. He has a lot of coaching experience that ranges all the way back to the early days of the game in 2016, and as his tweet says, he's experienced with macro strategy and player development, and he's quite flexible as well since he's coached under many different systems. That's all the news I have regarding Promise and the Valiant though, so moving on to the NYXL. It was announced on the 8th of October they had declined the option of Flower, and it's pretty sad to see Flower go, I'm not gonna lie. From what he did in his early days of his Overwatch career, we all know that he has a very, very high ceiling as a player, but since his days on XL2 Academy really, he just hasn't looked like that same player from the World Cup. So I can't say I'm super surprised to see the NYXL let him go. After all, they barely utilized him this year. He got playtime in Stage 4 and in the overall playoffs, but other than that, he almost never made an appearance on stage. It's kind of funny too, because in those last few weeks of the year, he did quite well, but I guess that wasn't enough in the end to secure the second year of his option. Hopefully this isn't the end of Flower's Overwatch League career right now. I'm hoping that he finds another team and doesn't get demoted to Tier 2 or anything. That would be really tragic. But anyway, next up on the list is the San Francisco Shock, as they sadly announced the departure of Nevix. Nevix was with the Shock since day 1 of 2018, and he has always been a really reliable player with a good work ethic, and he's just a great teammate. Nevix going to a new team definitely makes sense though. He was just rotting away on the bench since they have Choi Obin, and I think the Shock know he deserves a lot better than that. After all, Nevix is a starting caliber player. He's not some scrub. He's never been the best tank in the league or anything, but he's still consistently good, and I feel that some people don't appreciate what he contributed towards the Shock's success. People don't realize it, but he helped Choyopin sharpen his skills while pushing him to get better with friendly competition, especially when it comes to Sigma, since Nevix had been grinding him since day one when he came out on the PTR. Choyopin has even admitted to this on Twitter after Dak said he wouldn't have won Finals MVP if it weren't for Nevix. If arguably the #1 off-tank player in the world is saying this, then I think it's safe to say Nevix may be a bit better than people give him credit for. This is a really good opportunity for Nevix to finally be a starter in the league again. He's getting a lot of praise right now, and there's definitely a few teams out there who could use his help. I'm looking at you in particular, Paris. He's a perfect fit. I personally have always been a big fan of Nevix, so I'm really excited to see where he ends up going in 2020, and I'm just super happy to know that he'll probably be playing on stage again. The next team that we have to discuss, though, is the Seoul Dynasty. Now, Seoul is in quite the interesting situation. Toby, Jaehong, and Zumba are all now officially LFT. So Zumba not wanting to come back makes sense because they prefer Michelle and the synergy he has with Marvel, but Jaehong and Toby looking for new opportunities is a bit more concerning. That was their best support line in 2019 if you ask me. Now obviously, I don't know what's been going on between Seoul and these two players, but negotiations or the relationship between the two sides has definitely taken a major step backwards. In my opinion, it seemed like these guys would want to stay with Seoul until the end of time. This especially goes for Jaehong. He's one of the legends of Korean Overwatch, so I thought it was all but guaranteed for him to return to the Dynasty. But now him and Toby's future is not so certain. I'm sure they'll find new teams, but seeing them in non-Seoul uniforms would feel so wrong. It would be interesting to see where these guys sign if they did indeed leave Seoul. Things don't exactly look great for Jaehong, Toby, and Zumba though, just because there aren't that many full Korean teams out there who are in need of starting supports, or flex tanks for that matter. There aren't that many teams they could go to. Maybe all three of them signed with like Florida, or maybe London for Jaehong and Toby at least, but that's about it unless they're willing to play for an English-speaking team. It's funny too because I think Seoul is going to survive just fine even if they have to press on without Jaehong or Toby. Most Korean pro players are usually interested in playing for a team like Seoul, so I'm sure they could find decent replacements if they want to have more options available to them other than just Jaxay and Hylie. Free agency for Jaehong, Toby, Zumba, and the Dynasty is shaping up to be very interesting. Next up, we have the Toronto Defiant. So they've been coming out with a barrage of moves over the last week or so. In terms of releases as of this recording, Toronto decided to part ways with Sharik, Gods, Aid, and I'm37. So Aid and Gods were actually both pretty decent players in my opinion, so seeing them go was a little sad. Gods was a consistent off-tank who always brightened up a situation since he's a walking meme basically, and Aid quietly had some decent performances both when he had to play Zen while Neko was serving his suspension, and during Stage 4 when he was starting on main support. Sharik and I'm37 were a bit more expendable though. Neither of them really impressed this year, and I know for a fact that I'm37 desperately wanted to play for a new team, so these releases make sense if you ask me. Best of luck to all of these guys in free agency. Hopefully they all find new teams either in the Overwatch League or in Contenders at the very least. In other news, Toronto decided to hold on to Roki but turn him into a two-way player on Montreal Rebellion. I personally really like Roki, so I'm glad to see Toronto was interested in holding on to him, but since he's now a two-way player, he probably won't be on stage much for them anymore. With that said, Toronto is now in a situation where they are in need of a new main support. It'll be interesting to see who they pick up. Will they go in a Western direction at this position or sign a new Korean player? You have everybody's attention, Toronto. Now let's see what your next move is. Now to conclude the Overwatch League free agency news I have for you in this video, the Justice parted ways with a good chunk of their roster over the last week or so. They first announced the official departure of Janice, Sansam, Otto, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but Hyanu. The latter of the two I'm not too surprised to see get released because neither of them were all that great for the Justice this year. Otto in particular was kind of a letdown it felt like, but they don't really need him anyway. Stratus is clearly a better flex DPS option for them. In addition, Hyanu never really saw time on stage for the most part, so they had no use for him either. The Janice and Sansam release are a bit more surprising though. I'm well aware that both of them struggle greatly at times this year, but they certainly had their moments too. I know we all point at Janice and say he was an awful Reinhardt during the Goats meta, but it's not like it's all his fault. He was constantly having to adjust the way he played since the rest of his team played so passively, plus Corey and Otto were horrible on Zarya and Break. Janice was nowhere near perfect, but he deserved a second chance in my opinion with how he played in Stage 4. The same can be said for Sansam, but he actually did quite well in the second half of the year in general. He made some mistakes by not playing with his team sometimes, but he popped off a lot and showed flashes of brilliance on both D.Va and Roadhog. He was definitely one of the better players on this team I feel like, and I definitely as a result would have kept him if I was the Justice. Them releasing their 2019 tank line is a statement decision. This tells me the Justice firmly believe in Lulsish and Elivo. They believe those two will be the answer for their tank line from here on out. And who knows, maybe they are, but we're going to have to watch the Justice closely in 2020 to find out if this decision ends up paying off ultimately. In other news, the Justice announced they would not be re-signing Sleepy and Guido, who happen to be the only two flex support players on their roster. Now Sleepy said he was considering coming back to the Justice, so I'm assuming that maybe he found a new team to join, or perhaps the Justice just lost interest in him. As for Guido, well, the Justice probably just didn't want to have him back if I have to take a guess. Other than some bright spots in Stage 4, he was pretty unimpressive this year, so I can't say I'm too surprised to see him not get re-signed. Now obviously, this does leave a big hole in the Washington Justice roster. They need to find themselves a new flex support player or two. Like with Toronto, I'm curious to see if the Justice sign a Korean or Western player at this position, or perhaps one of each. And let's not forget that there's a chance they could be getting a new support line altogether if they're unable to re-sign Arc, who is an unrestricted free agent. The Justice have a lot of roster spots to fill out, so look for them to make some big moves this offseason. And in terms of Sleepy and Guido, well, I'm assuming at the very least Sleepy is going to find a new team. I can't say the same for certain with Guido, but we'll have to see. Oh, and before I forget, the Justice also announced the signing of their new head coach, Gould. This is the replacement for Wizard Young. To provide a bit of background info on him, Gould was a former coach on the Gladiators who also coached in Contenders and for Team Singapore. So needless to say, this guy brings a lot of experience to the table. But is he the answer to the Justice head coaching dilemma that Wizard Young left behind? Well, we're going to have to wait and see how the Justice perform in 2020 to find out. There's still some more signings for them to make overall for their coaching staff and just with their players in general, so the Justice have themselves quite the busy offseason, so keep an eye on them. Now for some quick World Cup news. So Team France announced on their Twitter that Poco will no longer be participating in the World Cup this year due to some health concerns. His replacement is going to be Tech36, who recently finished in the top 6 of Overwatch Contenders Europe while playing for Samsung Morning Stars. This is a pretty big blow for France. Poco was arguably their best player. The common consensus with France was that their roster was already looking relatively weak as it is, so losing Poco is only going to make it worse. It's looking like France could have quite the early exit in the World Cup this year. Apologies to any supporters of this team, but things don't exactly look good right now. Unless the meta suddenly turns more in their favor, then I don't expect France to get very far in this year's World Cup. And with that said, that is going to wrap up this week's episode of the Pro Overwatch News Recap. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more of it in the future, then be sure to hit that like button and sub to my channel if you're new, and feel free to let me know your thoughts on all of this news down in the comments section. As always, thank you all so much for watching today's video, I really do appreciate it, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.